At 4 years old, my mother sat me on a church bench and said, "Stay here. God will look after you." Then she walked away, hand in hand with my father and sister. I didn't cry. I just sat there watching them go. 2 decades later, they stepped into that same church declaring, "We're your parents. We've come to take you home." Boston's winter. Sun streamed through the stained glass of St. Margaret's Church, painting the floor with rainbow hues. The Sunday service had ended and everyone had gone home except for a little girl in a bright red coat. 4-year-old Grace Hudson looked at her mother with wide, anxious brown eyes. Elizabeth, her mother, smiled gently as she touched Grace's cheek and repeated, "Stay here. God will surely help you." There was a quiet oddity in her tone that Grace couldn't quite define. Even though she sensed something wasn't right, especially noticing her mother's a little shifty eyes, Grace asked in a small voice, "Where are you going? When will you be back?" Elizabeth didn't answer. Instead, she took the tiny hand of Amy, Grace's 2-year-old sister, dressed in a playful pink coat, her golden curls bouncing as she laughed. Meanwhile, Grace's stepfather, Joseph, waited silently. When Grace saw him, her heart raced. She knew he never smiled at her and believed he didn't love her. "Hurry, Liz." Joseph's voice finally broke the hush inside the church. Elizabeth, stroking Grace's hair lightly, urged, "Be a good girl. God will watch over you." Something felt off that day. Normally, after the service, the whole family would go home together with a roast beef dinner waiting for them. But today was different. "Mama, I want to go home with you," Grace pleaded as she tugged at her mother's sleeve. Firmly yet tenderly, Elizabeth released her hand and said, "Grace, listen to me. Stay here and wait." As her mother led Amy toward the exit, Grace felt as if her feet had turned to lead. The vivid light streaming through the stained glass began to dim, and the old church grew darker. At the door, Elizabeth looked back with an expression Grace couldn't decipher. Was it relief or was it sorrow? Joseph put a supportive hand on Elizabeth's shoulder, and together they left. Grace sat frozen on the wooden bench, unable to cry or speak as the heavy church door closed behind them, echoing like the collapse of her small world. Only the slow ticking of the church clocks filled the silence as she waited, just as her mother had told her. Soon after, Martha Jenkins, the church caretaker, arrived to clean. Surprised to find Grace alone, she asked softly, "Oh, my dear, why are you here?" Grace only murmured, "Mama said she'd come back." Martha's concerned eyes searched the quiet space. "Where's your mama?" she asked. Grace replied in a tiny voice, "Mama, Papa, and Amy left but promised to return soon." With worry, Martha immediately called Reverend Thomas, an elderly pastor known for his warm eyes. He hurried over and sat next to Grace. "Hello, little miss. What's your name?" he asked kindly. "Grace Hudson," she whispered. Reverend Thomas smiled gently, though worry laced his face as he repeated, "Didn't your parents explain where they were going?" Grace shook her head, her voice barely audible as she repeated, "Mama said, God will help you." The Reverend and Martha exchanged troubled glances and called the police. When officers arrived, they questioned Grace for her parents' names, address, and when they had last been seen. By nightfall, still on that bench, a kind police officer wrapped a blanket around Grace. When the officers visited her home later, they found most furniture intact but personal belongings and clothes neatly packed, clear signs of a planned departure. Tears welled in Grace's brown eyes, though she remained quiet, clinging to her mother's promise that God would help her. That night, Reverend Thomas took her to a small room in the church, offering her a warm meal and a safe place to rest. "God has brought you here, Grace, and we will care for you," he gently reassured her. In the days that followed, Grace lived in the church. Her parents and little sister vanished, leaving a deep scar on her young heart. For weeks, she sat by the window every morning, hoping to see them return. But as winter melted into spring and the flowers began to bloom, there was still no sign of the Hudson family. Reverend Thomas and his wife Esther, who longed for a child, began legal proceedings to adopt little Grace. The police investigation turned up no trace of Elizabeth and Joseph Hudson. It was as if they'd crossed state lines and changed their identities. "Why did they leave me behind?" Grace would whisper into the night, a question her small heart could not understand. During the day, Reverend Thomas's comforting words, "God never abandons us. Sometimes there are plans we can't understand but love lights our way," helped her heal. At age 7, Grace started elementary school. Intelligent and avid in her reading, she loved Bible stories, relating to figures like Moses, Joseph, and David, who overcame adversity. Her school life was ordinary, and although she made friends, she always held a small distance out of fear of being hurt again. At church, however, she was full of life, teaching Bible stories in Sunday school with enthusiasm. On her 12th birthday, Reverend Thomas presented her with a special Bible. "Grace, you have a special gift," he said. "Your words can move hearts." Around then, Grace began journaling, writing down her thoughts and faith, sometimes even penning letters to an imagined Amy, wondering if her little sister also enjoyed Bible stories. Over time, Grace became a well-known presence at school, winning debate competitions and leading the church youth group. People were drawn to her genuine words, but at night, nightmares still returned with her mother's smiling face and the image of the day her family walked out of the church. "Why don't I have a family?" she would ask in her sleep. At 16 one evening, Grace asked her adoptive parents why she still felt so alone. Esther hugged her close and said, "You do have a family, sweetheart. We're here, and you are also part of God's family. Even though your real parents made a mistake, it led you to us. God finds goodness even in pain." Those words slowly comforted her, and she began to embrace her past and look forward to the future. After graduating high school, Grace enrolled in the theology department at Boston University. Determined to help those who suffered abandonment like herself, she shone in her classes, hosting Bible study groups and volunteering at a local orphanage. "Your light brightens these children's hearts," the orphanage director remarked. Yet, a small void remained in her heart as she occasionally wondered about the parents who had left her behind, hoping that maybe one day she could forgive them. At 23, after Reverend Thomas suffered a stroke, his recovery was uncertain but his wisdom endured. Upon finishing graduate school, Grace immediately took up a position as a youth pastor at St. Margaret's Church, refining her preaching skills under the guidance of Reverend Thomas. "Your words are a divine gift, Grace," he would say. At 27, a turning point came when Reverend Thomas passed away peacefully, leaving Esther bereft yet comforted by the thought that he was now in heaven. At his funeral, hundreds gathered to honor his memory. That same night, alone in the church sanctuary and seated on the very bench where she'd been abandoned as a child, Grace knelt and prayed, "God, what am I meant to do?" In that quiet moment, she felt a vision. Her true mission was revealed. The next morning, with determination in her eyes, Grace told Esther, "I'm going to start a new church, a church of the light of hope, a safe haven for those who've been abandoned and hurt." Esther supported her wholeheartedly, whispering, "Thomas would be proud of you." Grace then rented a small warehouse and held her first service. Starting with about 20 people, her passionate sermons and warm hospitality soon drew a crowd. Her message was clear. No one is ever truly alone. Even in darkness, a light of hope guides us. In 3 years, Grace's church outgrew the warehouse and moved to a larger building, and 5 years later, it had grown into an organization with branches across the United States. Her sermons, broadcast on television, and her bestseller, Hope for the Abandoned, cemented her role as one of America's most influential religious leaders. Despite her success, Grace's heart still carried a small wound. The secret of her past remained hidden. Her public profile simply stated that she was the adopted daughter of Reverend Thomas and Esther Smith. She turned that very pain into a powerful source of healing for others. Esther often reminded her, "The day we found you was part of God's plan." Grace truly believed in that plan. She had overcome her childhood pain and used it to heal others. Her words resonated deeply with those who had felt abandoned. Every Sunday morning, the sanctuary overflowed with believers. On one special day, over 2,000 people gathered to hear Grace Hudson speak with the inscription, "Let there be light for the abandoned," proudly displayed on the walls. When she began, her gentle voice filled the room. "Thank you all for coming today." At 34, her deep brown eyes shone with both warmth and wisdom, her long chestnut curls falling elegantly around her shoulders. Her sermons focused on acceptance and healing, and this particular day, her voice carried an extra note of destiny. Descending slowly from the pulpit, she mingled with the congregation, speaking at eye level. "Don't let the pain of the past trap you. Rise above it and find new hope. If someone has abandoned you, maybe God is leading you on a new path." Her heartfelt words moved many. Some wept, others nodded or whispered prayers. Her message, born from personal loss, carried a rare truth that touched all who listened. When the service ended, the crowd rose in thunderous applause. Reverend Thomas's words echoed in her heart. God brings good out of bad situations. Later that evening, as people departed, Grace spoke with many who sought comfort, advice, or gratitude. Amid these exchanges, a familiar name was mentioned, Mary Johnson, her dedicated secretary. The little girl abandoned on that church bench had grown into a beacon of hope for the lost and hurting. The word she once heard, that God would take care of her, had indeed come true in ways she could never have imagined. And along the way, she reconnected with her long-lost sister, Amy, closing a circle that began on that cold church bench so many years ago. Why longtime supporter approached me after service. "There are visitors here who'd like to see you, Grace," she said. Grace's smile brightened. After all, so many people came each Sunday. Who is it? She asked. Mary, looking a bit puzzled, replied, They claim to be your family. They say they're special visitors. Grace's smile suddenly froze. Family? She echoed, her voice trembling. Yes, they say their names are Hudson, Elizabeth and Joseph Hudson, and their daughter Amy. At that moment, memories locked away for nearly 30 years rushed back. The red coat, that church bench, and my mother's final words. God will surely help you. My heart pounded. Where are they? I asked. Mary continued. They're waiting in the small conference room. Would you like to meet them? Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself. The people who had abandoned me as a little girl were here now. Why and why here? A storm of anger, fear, curiosity, and an odd sense of anticipation roiled inside me. Yes, I'll see them, I finally answered. Every step down the short hallway to that tiny conference room felt like an eternity. I recalled that fateful day when I was 4, sat on that same church bench hearing my mother's voice say, God will surely help you. When I opened the door, I saw 3 figures. An older couple and a woman in her 30s. My eyes were first drawn to Elizabeth, my mother. There were traces of her old beauty, though her face was now creased with wrinkles and her hair was white. Yet, her blue eyes shone as they always had. Grace, it's really you, she managed, her voice trembling with emotion. I stood there speechless, staring at the people before me. Next to her was a tall man, Joseph. Though time had left its mark, the firmness of his jawline and the familiar glimmer in his eyes were unmistakable. And then there was Amy, my sister, who was just a toddler when I last saw her. Now Amy was a poised, beautiful woman, looking at me with an expression mingled with guilt and anxiety, as though she had so much to say but couldn't find the words. Are you really our family? I asked in a shaky whisper. Elizabeth stepped forward, saying, We've come to take you home. At those words, something inside me snapped. I was thrown back to that long-ago moment. 4-year-old me sitting on that bench, hearing my mother's promise, Stay here, God will surely help you. And then the door slamming, leaving me to wait alone for hours, days, years. Yes, we finally found you, Elizabeth continued with a look of elation. She tried to approach, but instinct pulled me back. Let's go home, Joseph said. His voice, surprisingly gentle and familiar, echoed in the silent room. We've been searching for you all this time. I was lost for words. I couldn't tell if this scene was real or a fragment from one of my recurring nightmares. All I had ever longed for was a mother's love and true family bonds. Yet here stood the people who had left me behind. Amy kept quiet, her eyes fixed on mine. Finally, I managed to ask, Why now? Without missing a beat, Elizabeth replied, It took us years to find you. I saw you on television and knew instantly that you were my daughter of 30 years. I could barely contain my anger. For 30 years, you didn't look for me, I said, my voice trembling with pain. That's not true, Joseph interrupted. There were circumstances. We'll explain everything, just not here. Can we talk somewhere more private? Swallowing hard, I agreed. All right, let's talk at my home. As we moved out of the conference room, my sister Amy finally broke her silence. I'm glad to see you, she said in a small, earnest voice. But those words stirred complicated emotions in me. Was this the family bond I'd always dreamed of? Or something else entirely? There was a warning glimmering in her eyes, a caution I couldn't ignore. Let's go, I said, surprising even myself with the calm in my tone while inside my heart a raging storm brewed. I led them to my home. A modest, elegant residence in a quiet neighborhood about 15 minutes from the Church of the Light of Hope. It wasn't a mansion, but it radiated warmth and sincerity. The living room, decorated with framed Bible verses and mementos from churches around the world, invited conversation. Please have a seat, I said, sitting across from them. Elizabeth and Joseph sat on the sofa, while Amy chose a separate chair a little distance away, her eyes drifting around as if searching for pieces of my past. Lovely home, Elizabeth remarked. You've been very successful, I answered carefully. It's all thanks to God's guidance. A heavy silence followed, as if we were trying to bridge a 30-year gap with words. Finally, I asked in a tone more suited to business than family, Why did you come looking for me now? Elizabeth and Joseph exchanged uneasy glances. Elizabeth began hesitantly. We've been looking for you all along. When we went back to the church that day, you were already gone. I narrowed my eyes. Didn't you leave me behind? I pressed. No, Elizabeth said emotionally. It was a tragic misunderstanding. We had to take Amy to the hospital urgently. She developed a high fever. I'm sure I told you. Wait here, we'll be right back. I recalled that day vividly, my mother's voice echoing, God will surely help you. There was no mention of a hospital, and when they returned I was gone. Joseph continued. We reported your disappearance to the police, but no one could find you. I replied calmly. The police did find me. They even visited your home, but everything was neatly packed away. Elizabeth's face flushed. Well, we were in financial trouble. Joseph quickly added. We had to flee from creditors, but we've been searching for you ever since. I sensed too many inconsistencies in their story for it to be true over the past 30 years. Why didn't you contact me until you saw me on TV? I asked. Elizabeth hurriedly explained that it had been nearly impossible to locate me because we had all changed our names. Amy, sitting silently and staring out the window, gave the impression that she wished not to participate in the conversation. I excused myself and slipped into the kitchen to get some lemonade. Each sip a brief pause to gather my swirling thoughts. Were they lying? And if so, why come now? Returning to the living room, I noticed Elizabeth and Joseph whispering in low voices. They stopped when I approached. Here's some lemonade, I said, placing the tray on the table. Elizabeth then remarked warmly, Your church is truly wonderful, Grace. Thousands follow you. Yes, I replied. We even have branches across the country now. Joseph's eyes flickered with a calculating light. You must be doing very well financially, he commented. Doubt not at me. Was their interest in me genuine, or only in the success I had achieved? Suddenly, Amy spoke up for the first time. May I use your bathroom? She asked softly. Down the hall to the left, I answered, watching her depart. As I listened, I heard her footsteps echo toward the bathroom, then pause and finally head off toward my private study. Concerned, I rose and followed. When I opened the door to my study, Amy was standing by my desk. What are you doing? I asked. Turning to face me, Amy's expression was serious. I need to talk to you, just the two of us. Bewildered, I closed the door behind us. What do you mean? I don't believe what they say. I started. In a soft yet urgent tone, Amy confessed. They abandoned you on purpose, Grace. After your fame and success, it turns out you're your mother's child from her previous husband. Your father never really loved you as his own. When I was born, they planned to leave you on that church bench. I staggered as the truth hit me like a wave. How do you know this? I managed to ask. Amy's eyes shimmered with tears. Since I was little, I heard them whisper that you were adopted at first. Later, they admitted the truth to me. I've carried this guilt, thinking you were abandoned because of it. I always wondered about you, and I've come to say I don't want to be part of their twisted plan. I wanted to meet you, truly, as my sister. Just then, a knock came at the door. Everything all right? Called Elizabeth from the hall. What are you talking about? I asked, surprised. Amy and I exchanged a look of unspoken understanding. We're fine, Mother, Amy replied softly. We were just talking sister to sister. Taking a deep breath, I realized I had a decision to make. Give in to my old anger or handle this now with strength and wisdom. Let's go back, I said quietly to Amy. I have something to tell them. Returning to the living room, I found Elizabeth and Joseph standing awkwardly. I looked them squarely in the eyes and said in a calm but firm voice, Please sit down. We need to talk. My tone carried a new certainty, a readiness to embrace my past and shape my future. Your plan to exploit my success for financial gain has failed. The blood seemed to drain from Elizabeth and Joseph's faces. What are you saying? Elizabeth asked, trying to feign innocence, though her eyes betrayed her fear. Amy told me the truth, I said steadily. You abandoned me on purpose, and now you're trying to profit from everything I've built. Joseph's anger flared as he demanded, Amy, what did you say? Trembling, Amy stepped forward. Let's stop the lies. I owe you nothing but the truth. I continued quietly. I could sue you for fraud, but I won't. My teachings are about forgiveness and healing. I paused, letting the words sink in, then added, This is your final warning. Don't ever show your faces in my life again. Elizabeth burst into tears. I couldn't tell if they were real or just for show. It didn't matter anymore. I was done with the past. Please leave, I said, nodding toward the door. With no strength left to protest, Elizabeth and Joseph silently stood and left. After a moment of hesitation, Amy approached me. Should I go too? Her voice small with anxiety. I looked into her eyes and saw genuine regret and hope. That's your choice, I replied softly. I want to build a relationship with you, Amy. But if you need time, I understand. Amy nodded and we agreed to take things slowly. 3 months later, I launched a new sermon series titled What is True Family? For the first time, I publicly shared my story, being left on a church bench at 4, raised by Reverend Thomas and his wife, and uncovering the secret of my long-lost family. I told the congregation, family is not just defined by blood. It's made of those who support us, love us, and sometimes tell us hard truths. Sitting at the back was Amy, now a dedicated volunteer at the Church of the Light of Hope. Though our relationship was complicated, we were slowly forming the sisterly bond we both needed. When I finished my sermon, the congregation rose in applause. I could feel Reverend Thomas's words echoing inside me. God brings good out of bad situations. I smiled warmly at Amy. The little girl abandoned in a church had grown to become a beacon of hope for countless souls, and had finally found a genuine connection with her long-lost sister. Those words I heard as a child, "God will surely help you," had ultimately come true in ways I could never have imagined.